Well, good afternoon officially now, and we're going to talk about home theater design with some experts in the field. My name is Wenck with CEDIA, the CEDIA podcast. My co-host on the CEDIA podcast is Walt Zerbe down at the end there. Say hello, Walt.
Hi.
Love the bow tie and the matching CEDIA color. Well done. I like it. We are joined by... I'm sorry?
I owned a bow tie before I actually came to CEDIA.
Very good. We've got Nick Black, Managing Director of the Pyramid Group. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
And what's your firm all about? You're an integration firm that specializes in home cinema and other things?
Yeah, we're a broad kind of service company where we do everything from commercial audio-visual integration right the way through to residential, specializing in home cinemas. Terrific. But we also are lighting designers, so we have quite a large lighting design practice within the organization as well.
That's great. We've got Christopher Mullins from Sony. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
I think we know what Sony's all about already.
Yes.
Most people do.
Yes,
I would hope
indeed.
if they're here. And James Ratcliffe, who is with Homeplay. Hi.
Hi.
And you specialize in home cinemas as well?
Yeah, anything tech basically. I've been. I started working in a hi-fi shop when I was 14.
Oh, really?
And I've been doing that sort of thing ever since. And now we do all the things that a normal CEDIA member does.
All right. Well, let's start there. Let's start with the discovery process. How do you guys get leads for home cinema design? Where do you begin?
For us, it's been just word of mouth referral for a good time. We recently completed a really fantastic showroom, which has been really changed everything for us in terms of how we sell cinemas.
Right.
We've got 4 different surround sound systems all in the same space.
Excellent.
And we can show people the difference between a simple media room and a full-blown dedicated home cinema. And that's really been transformative for us in how we're able to upsell.
Terrific. I know Nick has used the CEDIA Awards plug to his benefit, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We've had some good success, repeat success, particularly in terms of awards for cinemas. But it's a really great reference point in terms of quality that I think consumers more and more are recognizing, actually, we're finding.
What's your discovery process like? How do you determine what the customer wants?
Well, for me, certainly, I think most cinemas, in the case of this one behind us, which is the Cavern, which we won Best Home Cinema EMEA last year for, it's a journey. Moreover, there's always levels, of course, to cinemas, and the perception of what a cinema might be to an end user is very, very different each time you speak to a new potential customer. But for us, we very much kind of start with the whole idea of what's the environment, what's the experience that we want to create for that person or family or whoever they might be. And that's the most crucial starting point. And we never talk about technology. Really, technology is the last part of the conversation almost, because it is very much about how do you want to use this space? Is it to be a dedicated cinema space? Is it more of a media room? So that kind of use case kind of discovery, as the guys were talking about in the previous discussion just now, is very much the starting point for how we come across. And then, of course, through that process, you understand then each of the individual stakeholders' kind of requirements, whether it's a design look and feel, whether it's specifically down to a particular type of viewing content. And it's just really incumbent upon ourselves to be able to make sure we understand what is that space being used for? Excellent. Is there some notion of the kind of style and feel? Does it want to be themed? Does it want to be something unique? Do they want something that's a little bit off the shelf? And out of that, then we can start to kind of knit those parts together into some kind of cohesive design. That's how we approach it.
Well,
So let me ask you a question. How many people out here do cinema design? Okay. How do you approach the argument of I want to have a gazillion seats in this room with the customer and tell them about the quality trade-offs and all that stuff?
Generally, it starts with a look on my face. I can't hide it, really, And in fact, I had it last week. I walked into a small basement space, and the chap said, "Oh, I'm thinking about up to 20 people," and it was literally I could have squeezed 6 chairs into this space. So, you've got to be diplomatic at all points, but...
To give CEDIA a big plug, the CEDIA designer is a great tool for that, because you can really easily show people, actually, if you do put 20 seats in here, this is what it's going to look like. No one's going to be able to see anything, and you won't be able to get into the seats anyway, even if you could. So,
and it's not going to sound too good at all the seats either.
Yeah. Exactly. So, we found that a great tool to be able to really quickly knock up a really accurate drawing to show people in a visual way that they're easily going to be able to understand.
I owe you a beer for that plug. That's terrific. That's great news.
We it sounds convenient that I'm going to bang on about the CEDIA design now, but we have found it to be really useful. So as an example, when we designed our demonstration room, we used a CEDIA designer, and then we had a demonstration for a client who bought the system based on the experience that he had, and then we were able to reuse the CEDIA designer again in his final room. So we basically went from paper to building a demonstration suite, and then this guy having a demonstration of that room and saying, I want exactly this. And it was also that he had that exact space as well, which was fortunate.
I had a question for you. When you go through all the formats and the choices for a customer, which one do they aspire to? The middle, the higher? Like when you demoed all those different versions in your demo room?
Well, everyone wants the best one, right? Not everyone's able or prepared to pay for it, but yeah, everyone always wants the best one.
But they clearly discern a difference.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not be able to sense the difference in a room. Yeah, we can really clearly demonstrate the difference.
Okay.
I think in my case, a lot of people actually just don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they really kind of walk in. They want to be guided. They want to be kind of taken, as I say, on a bit of a journey. And like James, we also have a showroom with a couple of different systems, a really nice dedicated cinema, one that's perhaps more of a kind of media family room type of setup. And it's really just about kind of taking them through the steps and saying, okay, look, this is one environment that you could have. And you give them the pros and benefits of that, and they get to experience that, and then you take them into another environment. And also, actually, we're I'm sure all of us very fortunate that the customers that thankfully we've built up over the years, the cinemas we've built, they're all incredibly happy and proud to show them off. So actually, once you kind of go beyond the initial kind of discovery process, if you like, and you kind of start to narrow down to, okay, I want this type of layout, X amount of seats, however you've technically kind of come up with the way in which that room's to be determined, you can take them then to other people's cinemas because they're always very open and very excited about showing that.
There appears to be a trend in the United States, and I'm wondering if it's also true in Europe, away from the dedicated cinema and more toward the media room. Are you finding that?
I'm at the moment. I'm kind of getting a mixed response, I
Mixed
suppose.
response. Okay, fair enough. And James, you seem to answer in the positive.
Yeah, definitely. Lots and lots of people are creating these big kind of open plan family areas that link into a kitchen and stuff, and they're not ideal spaces for consuming content. But it doesn't mean that we can't create a great experience in a space like that. It's just harder and often more expensive to do.
Of course.
Along those lines, are you seeing sources change a lot too? Are you seeing maybe more gaming? Are you seeing more Netflix streaming use and not just dedicated movie watching?
Yeah, I mean, from a Sony side, we see that for sure. Yeah, we see many different use cases where people want to consume many different types of content. It also has an influence on kind of the projected design and the way we kind of build our products as well, actually. So with many of our premium products now, we use laser technology, and that has some usability, convenience benefits. It's fast on, fast off. So people who want to consume content quickly, like Netflix, they used to immediately go into your cinema, turn it on, watch it straight away. That kind of usability thing is something we're always looking at, and we see people.
So do you gents mostly do new builds or retrofits, or is it very much a blend?
Bit of everything.
Bit of
everything.
both,
Okay.
very much so.
So
yeah.
obviously you have to have a conversation with either an interior designer, architect, or both. So how do you approach that to make sure that everybody's in the same team and nobody is fighting?
I personally, I think that most of the time when you've got other experts, if you like, or consultants on board as part of a process, they tend to default to, as we all naturally do, we kind of default to our own kind of skill sets and experience. And if you put yourself across in a way that clearly states that you kind of know what you're talking about, moreover, they'll go, look, actually, you're the expert in that particular environment or in that particular discipline. Right. So it's about collaborating and working with people and making sure that everybody gets the best out of whatever that project team environment is for the client.
Excellent. And you, James?
Yeah, very much working with people and not trying to just say, hey, this is my domain and we need a black room, and because particularly in these more open plan spaces, you can't do that. So we've got to look at things like ALR screens and very bright laser projectors and that sort of thing to be able to get the best, to be able to please everyone.
So I got to ask a question. When a designer says, I need to have mirrors in here, or I need to have this color wall in here, How do you guys get over those? Well, you really can't have that. I mean, what are some of the tools you use to make sure that you're more on the functional side than you are on the
turn
view
the
side?
lights on in the demo facility.
Yeah.
I mean I mean if you can see it and it's really obvious, the difference between a black room where you get amazing contrast and dynamic range compared to a room with just some lights on makes a massive difference. So anyone can appreciate that, and it's a really simple thing that you can show people.
But acoustics as well, when you talk about mirrors or hard surfaces, again, this is a big thing that a lot of people don't appreciate. It's just the way in which a room will respond to high pressure audio. So absolutely lighting, contrast, brightness is obviously a key part of it. But yeah, we spend a lot of time talking to people about the acoustic response.
So you're
in the room.
educating the designer
As much
and
as we're
homeowner.
able to, absolutely, yeah.
And you also have to tell a high-end client on many cases that they're going to lose square meters as a result of sound isolation.
Yeah, back to the question around how many seats can I fit in here.
Right.
It's always everything's a trade-off and a compromise in all these aspects.
Sure. And do you have any preferred techniques for sound isolation in these theaters that you're building?
We approach it in different ways, but again, it kind of depends on the style of the room, I suppose. I mean,
Right.
there are the
Sure.
ubiquitous kind of, there's some great systems off the shelf out there, things like Cinema Build Systems. People like that are doing great kind of work so that people can put together fairly quickly a room that also has quite good kind of acoustic performance. But the way we always work is that we'll take a given space and we always do a calculation using our 3D audio software. We use software called ISE. And from that, then, we can determine what the actual response of the room will be. There's always going to be a target response that we're looking for, of course.
Sure.
And then literally from that bit of information, we can then kind of work backwards, and ultimately we get success because we've done the design engineering right at the very start. So the actual process of the acoustic treatment can either be, and in our case, mostly a kind of custom kind of hybrid of the way in which we need to treat that room depending on what the issues might be. And the obvious stuff, whether it's base treatment, base management, right the way through to reflection and absorption.
Terrific.
Yeah, I think and obviously it's way easier to do in a room like Nick's built here, where it's a dedicated space and you can have fabric wall systems and that sort of thing. It's harder to do in a room with glass walls and concrete floors and what have you. But
Sure.
But just explaining to people that the room is the most important thing in a sound system, and you can put the best set of speakers in a bad sounding room and it's never going to sound great. And just trying to help people to understand that having a rug or something like that, anything like that is going to help in a big room like that.
Absorption, diffusion, always. Excellent. Video calibration, how important is it, Nick?
It's crucial. We've mentioned awards briefly at the start, but I always kind of say that, in the process of kind of putting in for a CEDIA award in particular, when I speak to people that kind of say, the CEDIA awards, it's really involved, there's a lot of work involved in kind of doing that. I think as an industry, whether we use the CEDIA designer as an off-the-shelf piece of software, which is a fantastic tool, or whether you're actually doing it yourself manually from an engineering stance, whether it's video calibration or whether it's the audio calibration, we ultimately are driven by the fact that we've got set standards, we've got performance objectives, and we need to be able to prove that the room, in every aspect, relates to that. So if in the end that you actually have a room that you feel worthy or think is kind of a great opportunity to put forward for a CEDIA award, we should, as integrators, if we understand the design process correctly from an engineering perspective, have considered that. So the documentation, the calibration, the physical design, the drawings, everything are related to that.
Terrific.
Should be part of our process, so that when it comes to the potentially owner's task of bringing all that together for a CEDIA award, that job should be made easier because you should be
Copying
doing
and
it
pasting.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this really is what Sony thinks about when we're designing products, is all
Excellent.
about taking that kind of lens-to-lens process. So Sony has a lot of solutions on the acquisition side, grading side, and then the display side. So we're really looking to deliver the director's intent with our projector technology. And if you don't calibrate those systems to the standards that people are creating those images for, then you're not delivering what the director's intent is.
Obviously.
So,
Go ahead, sir.
And I would say to use a professional calibrator to do it, because it's one of those things that unless you're doing it every day of your life, it's really hard to be good at it.
Absolutely.
And most of us don't operate the kind of size of businesses that are able to have a full-time video calibrator on the books. So there's tons of guys out there, and they're pretty reasonable as well. If you think of, 300, 400, 500 quid to completely calibrate a room, and sometimes audio and video for that kind of money. And in the grand scheme of building a great media space, that's not huge chunk of money, but it gives a massive difference in performance.
Have you ever had the customer listen to the room pre-calibration, and or do you give them calibration reports once the room's calibrated so they can hear what that does for them visually and audio?
Quite often that, when you're completing a cinema and the client's like itching to get in there and watch a film, but you haven't booked the calibrator yet because you're still finishing off a few things, that they often do see the difference between before and after, and it's a really amazing difference actually, and it's probably one of the best value things you can do for home cinema.
Have you ever had the opportunity to upgrade a room for a customer that somebody else had done or was obsolete or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
In every respect, yeah.
And I'm sure they're thrilled with the results at the end of that process.
Yeah, exactly as James said. As I say, it goes back to this whole thing. The journey is everything from that first brief, that whole discussion around what that room wants to look like, right through to the guy literally itching at the door to get in while you're still trying to kind of set it up, which can be a double-edged sword sometimes, of course. Clients can be a complete pain, frankly.
That never happens.
Go
So
away.
much easier without them.
Exactly. I mean, clients, who'd have them, but no, the end result is always very much that big smile,
And on a projector
Please.
side, on the retrofit side, it's something we also think about when we release new products. You've got to keep them similar size, similar shape, so you can retrofit those in the same spaces as they were previously. If you're replacing a projection system, you can't have one that's twice as long as it was, twice as deep as it was before. So when we launch our laser projectors or any new model, we always try and keep them a size which can easily retrofit and make it as easy for the integrator as possible.
So this conversation has obviously been basically about two-piece projection, but do we see a point ever where the audio is going to be, where the technology behind audio is going to reach a point where the flat screen will become viable and you can get that illusion of the dialogue coming from there?
I think that's happening now, isn't it? I mean, in the case of, obviously, there's some great facilities around with, for example, Samsung's Wall, where they've partnered with Carey.
Right.
Again, down to the power of the DSP ultimately, and being able to kind of not necessarily kind of promoting Trinov per se, but products like Trinov, where you're actually able to properly calibrate a room that has really great remapping, 3D remapping algorithms. Yes, you can make it very compelling. So when you're forced with a fixed display to take the speakers out on the extremities, you can if you like, reposition the speakers with kind of beaming technology and steering of that speaker. So yes is the simple answer, yeah.
Well,
Now that we have HDR and higher contrast ratios and more light output, are you trying to push for darker rooms, and are you having discussions with customers about the need to make the room darker to get more contrast in your systems?
And to use better projectors as well, really, because you can't get that much light out of an inexpensive projector, because people just see the specs and they see, it's 4K, and that'll work on it, but
By the time you
to do
calibrate
HDR
everything, your
properly,
light
you need-
output's down.
Yeah, you need a lot more punch and a lot more brightness, so it's an opportunity to sell better projectors, if anything.
And from a Sony side, we kind of see like a number of core image quality aspects. So one is obviously brightness for that HDR, but also the native contrast of your panel. Having a 3-panel system is also very important for projection, where you have a separate red, green, and blue panel. Enables you to have very accurate color reproduction without some other effects you can get with single panel systems. So having that level of kind of overall quality, you need to cover all the bases. You need brightness, contrast, and color reproduction to deliver the whole solution. With some of the less expensive solutions, you're kind of compromising in some of those areas.
For my part, in that respect, then absolutely we're aiming for, whether it's the correct luminance delivered or whether it's the right contrast ratios or whatever else. Personally, I do find that unless you've got somebody who's a movie buff or somebody who's had cinemas in the past, understands what they're looking for, what are their benchmarks, which obviously you would learn right at the very start of the discussion. But personally, I find that most people are wowed by the fact that you've created an environment which is obviously a combination of a set of parts, whether it's the screen, whether it's the image, whether it's the audio, the immersion. I measure success by the smiles on customers' faces. And I think we can be guilty as an industry of getting a little bit kind of hung up on technology and talking about all these different acronyms, whether it's audio or video or whichever else it is. I do always just try and kind of make sure the customer is happy in the environment that we've created, but at the same time, we've adhered to all these different specifications, we've calibrated to the absolute nth degree, so that we're confident that we've done the best possible job technically that we can, but without kind of going into this whole set of acronyms and technology, because I don't think that's what people are interested in.
So what's the biggest challenge you've ever encountered when designing a cinema or building one for someone?
Actually, I keep going on about our showroom, but it was one of the toughest rooms we've ever done.
Really?
Because it was very low ceiling, concrete beams, and in the end, we ended up having to put in. We didn't have enough throw because we wanted a certain size screen, and the projector was too far forward in the room. And if we had mounted it on the ceiling, it would have felt too imposing. We didn't want to use a drop-down lift because that would have felt too big when it dropped down the ceiling. So we used a mirror rig, like with 2 mirrors, so the projector's actually facing away from the screen, going onto one mirror, back onto another mirror, and then back onto the screen.
Oh, that's great.
But then, of course, putting the projector up in the ceiling, you then need air conditioning to keep the projector cool. Otherwise, it's in like an oven.
And then you have the added noise.
And the noise thing. Yeah. So then we had to put in these great big meter-long silencers on the fans to try and keep the. So you fix one problem and it throws up another one. It's like a kind of it's like a domino effect of problems. I mean, that's what we do. We overcome issues like that.
Before I go to Nick with the same question, I want to ask you about the HVAC issues that you obviously run into with these rooms. I mean, it's a closed room that can get hot and sweaty and sultry very quickly. It can be a sauna, and you have to provide airflow at the lowest possible noise levels.
And fresh air as well, not just air conditioning.
Exactly.
If you just put air conditioning in a room, then a lot of people think that brings in fresh air, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't. No, it just cools the air that's in there. So. All these things need to be considered, and particularly if you are trying to build a room that is keeping the sound within the room, then it'll get out of any tiny gap. So that's a tough thing to do.
Biggest challenge, Nick, you ever encountered?
I think that in the context of the discussion today, the cinema that we've got on the screen, the Cavern, actually was. Physically our biggest challenge because we had a very, very discerning and demanding and technically fairly savvy customer, which is engineers and integrators. It's difficult sometimes when you get that amateur professional type of guy who thinks he knows a lot about what we do and probably does know a lot about what we do. So constantly is questioning everything that you do. Every decision you make is being questioned. So you're constantly having to kind of go through that. But the physical constraints of the room that we were in, again, a basement space, the ceiling height was 2.35 meters floor to ceiling. We had to get 6 seats in there. So, of course, building a staging, getting the head height, the head clearance, the trade-offs with viewing angles, which is always an issue, obviously, with multi-tiered seating anyway, and getting to the point where the client could understand that, yes, they could have 6 seats, but they could only have X size of screen because of X, Y, and Z. Right. All the compromises that come into that. And then we kind of made life more difficult for ourselves because we designed the audio system around a particularly non-traditional cinema speaker box from a company, Martin Audio. So it's a traditional trapezoidal design box. A bunch of reasons why we chose that. It was very, very good, very dynamic, excellent kind of musicality and power handling of a particular speaker. Whereas a lot of home theatre speakers, of course, are typically small form factor, fairly shallow or in wall. So as I say, we made it difficult for ourselves because we ended up with a speaker which protruded out from the walls, and in the case of this cinema, it was a 9.3.6 Atmos arrangement. Compromises because of the ceiling, so the overheads were tucked out to the edges. But once we'd physically designed that environment from an audio point of view, the design literally came from there. So the high points and low points that then subsequently became the design for the room were literally as a result of the fact we chose to use this particular type of speaker. So I think all said, we had a challenging customer, but one that trusted us and gave us actually a pretty much a kind of an open piece of paper, I suppose, a blank piece of paper to design something that was going to be truly unique, which we like to think with Cavern is, but trusted us technically to deliver something that would be amazing.
Terrific. Walt?
Speaking of challenges, how about the other trades? Like, for instance, I know when we built our theater at our CEDIA Experience Center and we specified what the HVAC needed to look like, the contractor's like, yeah, no, you don't need that much ventilation in that room, and you don't need these ducts to be like this, so air, sound doesn't propagate through. Do you get a lot of pushback from the other trades when you're looking at how many BTUs a person puts off in a room, and and all the other requirements that you need?
Personally, I've never really experienced that. We tend to we provide a whole service.
So they just, you do?
Yeah. I mean, we don't do the HVAC, but we very much kind of tell people what we need to
they
achieve in
listen.
terms of air movement. Not always, not always. So, I mean, look, again, it's back to what we were saying. You've got to work with people. This is always a collaboration, these things.
Sure.
So that's the approach.
And every theater's a compromise in the end, right?
Yeah,
little bit.
it's never ever perfect. There's always
Sure.
always something.
All right. Any questions for the gents before we wrap this up? Anyone? That's fine then. More information on CEDIA is available at cedia.net. The CEDIA Designer, you can find out more about that there, cediadesigner.org. What's the URL for the website there, Nick?
For
you?
it's thepyramidgroup.co.uk.
All right. The preferred Sony
It's
URL?
pro.sony for our home cinema projectors.
Very good. And for Homeplay?
And homeplay.tv.
Very good. Nick Black, Managing Director of the Pyramid Group, Christopher Mullins from Sony, and James Ratcliffe, the Managing Director of Homeplay. How about a round of applause for our panelists?